The early light spreads across the southern highlands of Canaan, illuminating an encampment shaped by pastoral movement, clan hierarchy, and the fragile balance of household alliances. Tents of rough-woven wool rise in silhouettes against the horizon, their forms arranged in a pattern reflecting the social structure of a Middle Bronze Age household. Within this environment, Hagar's expulsion unfolds as a historically grounded event rooted in the legal, social, and cultural realities of the ancient Near East. Hagar's identity as an Egyptian servant aligns with evidence from Egyptian tomb paintings and textual records depicting Semitic pastoralists interacting with Egyptian households through trade, service, and diplomatic exchange. Egyptian servants appear in multiple Middle Bronze Age contexts, reflecting a world where individuals moved between regions due to famine, conflict, or economic necessity. The social position of a female servant within a patriarchal household is documented through texts from Nuzi, Mari, and Ugarit, which describes surrogate arrangements where a servant woman could bear a child on behalf of a barren wife. These surrogate contracts often included specific clauses regarding the child's status, the rights of the mother, and the authority of the primary wife. The tension between Sarah and Hagar mirrors patterns found in these documents, where the birth of a child through a servant could elevate the servant's status and create conflict within the household hierarchy. The birth of Isaac introduces a shift consistent with ancient inheritance law, as Nuzi Tablets reveal that when a biological son was later born to the primary wife, a surrogate's child could lose inheritance rights. These texts provide a direct cultural parallel, grounding the household conflict in documented legal practices of the Middle Bronze Age. The encampment near Beersheba situates the event within a region rich in archaeological evidence, where excavations reveal seasonal encampments and trade routes connecting the Negev to Egypt and the hill country. The landscape Hagar traveled reflects a real environment shaped by wells, caravan paths, and the harsh conditions of the southern wilderness. The decision to send Hagar away aligns with legal precedents found in ancient Near Eastern adoption contracts and inheritance disputes, which often resulted in the relocation of individuals to protect the status of the primary heir. The provision of water and bread reflects a customary practice documented in both textual and ethnographic sources, where individuals departing a household received basic supplies for travel through arid regions. The wilderness of Beersheba is characterized by dry riverbeds, sparse vegetation, and seasonal water sources that determine the survival of travelers and pastoral groups. Archaeological surveys reveal ancient wells, rock-cut cisterns, and pathways used by caravans moving between Egypt and the Levant, providing a tangible backdrop for Hagar's movement. As Hagar departs, the early light stretches across the desert plain, illuminating a world where social customs, legal structures, and environmental realities converge. The morning deepens as Hagar steps beyond the perimeter of the tents into a landscape shaped by harsh clarity, where dry riverbeds carve pale lines through the earth and scattered acacia trees stand as solitary markers. The world she enters is not an empty void, but a region documented through surveys revealing travel, routes that served as lifelines for those crossing the desert in search of water, trade, or refuge. The wilderness of Beersheba is defined by seasonal wadis that fill briefly during winter rains before returning to silence beneath the heat of the sun. Excavations across the region have uncovered rock-cut installations, storage pits, and traces of temporary encampments used by nomadic groups whose movements followed the availability of pasture. The skin of water Hagar carries aligns with vessels found in Middle Bronze Age contexts, typically made from goat hides treated with oils to prevent leakage. While these containers were standard for travelers, their contents evaporated quickly under intense heat, making them insufficient for long journeys without access to wells or springs. Hagar's Egyptian identity situates her within a broader pattern of cross-regional movement attested in both archaeology and textual records. Egyptian tomb paintings from Beni Hazen depict Semitic pastoralists with garments and tools resembling the material culture associated with the patriarchal narratives. The presence of Egyptian names, artifacts, and artistic motifs in QAnon further supports the interconnectedness of the two regions during the Middle Bronze Age. As Hagar moves deeper into the wilderness, the semi-arid climate of the Middle Bronze Age, Negev, characterized by limited rainfall and soaring daytime temperatures, becomes increasingly significant. Archaeological studies of ancient climate patterns indicate that water sources were concentrated around wells and seasonal springs, making navigation dependent on knowledge of the terrain. Travelers often followed routes marked by cairns, animal tracks, or the remnants of earlier encampments, creating a network of paths that guided movement across the desert. The well known as Be'er Lahai is situated within a region where multiple ancient wells have been documented through surveys and excavations. While the precise identification of the well remains debated, the presence of these ancient water sources reflects a long history of human activity centered around scarce but vital resources. These wells served as gathering points for pastoralists and traders, anchoring movement across the wilderness and shaping patterns of settlement and migration. The moment Hagar pauses reflects the lived experience of countless individuals who traversed the arid landscapes of the ancient Near East, where survival depended on access to water. The combination of heat, dehydration, and isolation, documented in ancient texts, underscores the vulnerability of travelers in regions where the desert could both conceal and reveal the paths of those who crossed it. The terrain around Beersheba reveals a world defined by scarcity, where the presence of a single well could determine the fate of entire caravans. Archaeological surveys have documented ancient water systems carved into bedrock, their depths reaching toward underground aquifers that sustained pastoral groups during the driest months. As the water runs out, Hagar's experience reflects the physiological realities of dehydration in arid environments, where individuals can experience rapid declines in strength and disorientation within hours. Her decision to place the child under a shrub aligns with the behavior of individuals seeking shade in extreme heat, a response documented in both ancient texts and modern ethnographic accounts. The wilderness around Beersheba contains vegetation consistent with the narrative setting, including shrubs such as broom trees, acacia, and desert saltbush that grow in clusters along wadis. Archaeobotanical studies from the region confirm the presence of these species during the Middle Bronze Age, offering a botanical backdrop that aligns with the environmental details preserved in the narrative. The afternoon light settles across the wilderness with a muted glow, softening the harsh contours of the desert and illuminating the pale stones and faint traces of ancient paths. Archaeological surveys document pottery fragments, animal bones, and hearth remains scattered across the region, revealing a landscape where pastoralists paused to water their herds and caravans rested. The broader cultural context of Hagar's story reflects patterns documented in legal texts from Nuzi and Mari, which describe the complexities of household dynamics involving surrogates and primary wives. These documents provide a framework for understanding how the birth of a biological son could reshape inheritance rights and lead to the expulsion of a surrogate. The wilderness setting aligns with environmental studies reconstructing a climate where seasonal fluctuations influenced migration patterns and access to water. The challenges faced by Hagar mirror the dangers of dehydration and exposure described in ancient texts, as well as the importance of wells as points of refuge. The presence of Ishmael within the narrative introduces a dimension consistent with broader patterns of lineage and identity, as genealogical traditions often preserved the origins of individuals who became ancestors of distinct groups. The association of Ishmael with the wilderness and regions south of Canaan aligns with patterns of migration documented through archaeological evidence, including the spread of pastoral groups into the northern Arabian Peninsula. Excavations at sites such as Tel Massos and Tel Malhada reveal evidence of early nomadic groups inhabiting the southern regions, with pottery assemblages and animal enclosures indicating complex interactions between pastoralism and trade. These findings offer a glimpse into the environment that shaped the lives of individuals who moved through the wilderness in search of pasture, water, and opportunity. As Hagar and Ishmael continue, The desert stretches outward in a vast expanse shaped by wind, heat, and the enduring presence of ancient pathways. The landscape reflects the convergence of legal customs, household dynamics, and environmental realities that define the ancient Near East, grounding the narrative in a world preserved through archaeology and material traces. The wilderness of Beersheba stands as a testament to the resilience of individuals navigating displacement and identity. Within a landscape shaped by both human and environmental forces, Hagar's journey emerges from this world not as a mythic episode, but as a historically grounded moment preserved through the evidence of the ancient past. The archaeological record of the Negev highlights the intermittent nature of settlement, where periods of intensive land use were followed by centuries of abandonment. This cyclical pattern mirrors the movement of pastoral groups like Abraham's household, whose presence in the landscape was often temporary but left a lasting imprint on regional traditions. The legal mechanisms that led to Hagar's departure were not unique to her situation, but were part of a broader system of social regulation governing family life and property. Contracts from the 2nd millennium BCE detail the rights of secondary wives and their children, often providing a safety net that prevented total destitution, even in cases of expulsion. In the case of Hagar, the provision of basic supplies and her eventual survival had a well align with the expectation that an expelled member of the household would seek refuge at known landmarks. The geography of the Negev, with its distinct regions of highlands, plains, and craters, provided a variety of environments that supported different modes of survival. The archaeological record of the Negev highlights the intermittent nature of settlement, where periods of intensive land use were followed by centuries of abandonment. This cyclical pattern mirrors the movement of pastoral groups like Abraham's household, whose presence in the landscape was often temporary but left a lasting imprint on regional traditions. The legal mechanisms that led to Hagar's departure were not unique to her situation, but were part of a broader system of social regulation governing family life and property. Contracts from the 2nd millennium BCE detailed the rights of secondary wives and their children, often providing a safety net that prevented total destitution, even in cases of expulsion. In the case of Hagar, the provision of basic supplies and her eventual survival had a well align with the expectation that an expelled member of the household would seek refuge at known landmarks. The geography of the Negev, with its distinct regions of highlands, plains, and craters, provided a variety of environments that supported different modes of survival. Hagar's movement toward the south likely followed established seasonal paths used by herders to navigate between the highlands and the coastal plain. These routes were anchored by reliable water sources, many of which are still visible today as stone-lined wells and cisterns carved into the bedrock. The preservation of Hagar's name and her Egyptian origin in the narrative suggests a historical memory of the diverse populations that inhabited the Levant during the Middle Bronze Age. Egypt's influence in the region is well attested through the presence of Egyptian administrative centers, trade goods, and cultural exchange documented in archaeological sites. For a servant like Hagar, the journey into the wilderness was a return to a landscape that, while harsh, was part of a broader network of movement she likely understood. The physiological strain of her journey was compounded by the responsibility of caring for a child, a factor that heightened the urgency of finding a water source. The psychological weight of expulsion, combined with the physical environment, creates a scenario where the discovery of a well is seen as a pivotal moment of survival. In the ancient Near East, the discovery of a new well was often celebrated as a significant event, marking a point of life in an otherwise inhospitable region. The well of Be'er Lahira, associated with Hagar, became a landmark that preserved the memory of her experience for future generations. Ishmael's growth in the wilderness is described in terms that reflect the lifestyle of the nomadic and semi-nomadic groups of the southern Levant. The mastery of the bow and the ability to hunt were essential skills for those living outside the settled agricultural zones of the north. Archaeological evidence from the Negev reveals the use of flint arrowheads and bone tools that support the presence of hunting and gathering alongside pastoralism. The social organization of these groups was often based on kinship ties that extended across large geographic areas, facilitating trade and mutual defense. Ishmael's marriage to an Egyptian woman, arranged by Hagar, further underscores the cultural and familial links between the Negev and the Nile Delta. This connection provided Ishmael's descendants with access to the resources and trade networks of one of the most powerful empires of the ancient world. The tradition of 12 princes descending from Ishmael reflects a tribal structure common among the nomadic peoples of the Arabian Peninsula and the Levant. These tribes occupied a vast territory, stretching from the borders of Egypt to the Euphrates, playing a crucial role in the movement of goods and ideas. The material culture of these groups, characterized by portable shelters and durable tools, allowed them to thrive in environments that others found uninhabitable. Excavations at sites like Kuntalet, Adrud, reveal the presence of desert sanctuaries where travelers and pastoralists left offerings and inscriptions. These sites served as religious and social hubs, reinforcing the identity of the groups that moved through the wilderness. The persistence of the Hagar and Ishmael narrative within the cultural memory of the region highlights its importance in explaining the origins of the desert-dwelling tribes. For the ancient audience, the story provided a way to understand the complex relationship between the settled inhabitants of Canaan and their nomadic neighbors. The archaeological and textual evidence converged to show a world where household disputes, legal codes, and environmental realities were inextricably linked. Hagar's journey from the tents of Abraham to the well in the wilderness encapsulates the challenges and resilience of those who lived on the margins of the ancient Near East. The archaeological record of the southern Levant during the 2nd millennium BCE reveals a complex mosaic of ethnic and social groups. The Negev served as a vital bridge between the agricultural heartlands of Canaan and the mineral-rich regions of the Sinai and Arba. Copper mining and trade, documented at sites like Timnah, provided an economic engine that supported the movement of people across the wilderness. These economic activities necessitated the development of sophisticated desert survival strategies, including the management of scarce water resources. Hagar's ability to survive and provide for Ishmael in this environment reflects a mastery of these traditional survival techniques. The genealogical records of the Ishmaelites, preserved in ancient texts, mirror the administrative lists found in the archives of Mari and Ebla. These records emphasize the importance of descent and tribal affiliation in defining social and political status within the region. The transition from the Middle Bronze Age to the Late Bronze Age saw shifts in settlement patterns, but the core desert lifestyle remained remarkably resilient. Environmental changes, including fluctuations in rainfall, forced groups to adapt their migration routes and grazing lands. The narrative of Hagar and Ishmael functions as a foundational account for the identity of the tribes inhabiting the Shur and Havilah regions. Archaeological surveys in these areas have identified stone-built enclosures and burial cairns that date back to the early 2nd millennium BCE. These features suggest a landscape that was deeply marked by the presence of nomadic groups, even in areas without permanent settlement. The cultural memory of Hagar's Egyptian background may also reflect the historical presence of Egyptian mining expeditions in the southern desert. Such expeditions often included local Levantan workers, creating a hybrid culture that combined Egyptian and Semitic elements. The story thus captures a specific historical moment when the borders between Egypt and Canaan were porous, and the desert was a space of encounter. The legal disputes within Abraham's household are a microcosm of the broader social tensions that characterize the Middle Bronze Age Levant. As the archaeological record continues to expand, it provides a more nuanced context for the lives of individuals like Hagar, who operated on the fringes of power. These material traces serve as a bridge between the ancient narrative and the physical reality of the landscape. The enduring presence of the wilderness of Beersheba reminds us of the harsh conditions that shape the history and faith of the region. Ultimately, Hagar's story is a testament to the intersection of human law, environmental necessity, and the search for identity in the ancient Near East.